Succession is an extreme example. For those of you who have watched it, you're going to know this. For those of you who haven't, I'll just give you the premise is that it's this family. It's a family that is based on, and this is kind of interesting, Todd. I'll read this to you because I found this. So the family is fictional. Okay. The Roys are fictional. Like, so that's something that Jesse Armstrong, the creator, has said. They're fictional, but they're based on a lot of different families. The first one that everybody brings up is the Murdochs. You know who the Murdochs are?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're the Fox News people, and, what's his name? Rupert Murdoch has sons, and he also has daughters, and there is always talk of there being like infighting and who's going to take over. And Rupert Murdoch still hasn't left as far as, we found out from this, what was it? The Dominion lawsuit, that Rupert Murdoch said he didn't have an active role, but then they found out during the lawsuit he actually did. So he's still, even in his 90s, it's such a Logan Roy move, right? Like, he just is not leaving. So that's one of the families it's similar to. It's also similar to the Salzbergers, which I didn't know this group. It's the people who own the New York Times. I guess their family has this kind of dynamic. The Hearsts, the Hearsts, who were the, William Randolph Hearst family. They were newspaper moguls. The Maxwells, and this was really interesting. He was also a newspaper mogul, and his daughter was Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the woman who was helping Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, wow.
And so she was just sentenced to prison a little bit ago, as we all know. And then the Carnegies, who Brian Cox, who plays Logan Roy, said that's who he pulled from for inspiration for his character. Basically a kid who had nothing, who grew up and figured out how to be this kind of, I don't even want to use the word character, like this kind of force in the universe, because Logan Roy is not a very human person. Obviously he's a human being, but he doesn't act in a very human way. His whole goal, he dehumanizes people, and he uses people to get his needs met.
Yeah.
He is not somebody.
And his needs are power.
His needs are power. His needs are power and money. But I think power over money. Don't you think? I think that's something
money is a vehicle to power.
Correct. But once you have billions of dollars, getting another $1 billion doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So it's like, how do you keep power? So I just thought that was interesting, all the different families that they kind of pulled from. But so what are the lessons from Succession? I watch this show. I watch every show because of human behavior. Like, I watch a lot of cult shows. I watch a lot of scary things. I watch a lot of uncomfortable things like Succession. And I don't love them all, but there's something about watching how people relate to each other that is really interesting to me.
Interpersonal communication, relationship, all that good stuff.
Family dynamics, like history of trauma. You can see it. And people who are great, like shows that aren't that good, they don't have writers that do enough of the investigating into character development. But really good writers have really good background on their characters. And you're like, this makes sense. This is what would happen. And so it's just one of those shows that obviously Todd and I highly recommend. But these are kind of the things that I pulled out of it. And Todd, please, I'm coming in with my 3 things, but I want you to elaborate with things that you really noticed.
And you know what I'm coming in with, sweetie?
What?
I'm going to tell you what I'm coming in with.
Okay. Not true.
Well, I'll put it this way. I put no thought into this podcast. It's all Cathy, and I'm just going to riff off of what you say.
Okay. So the way I want to do this is I want to talk about the things that the kids were lacking and the things that we can learn from this show. Like, what were the things besides there's obvious things, the trauma they experienced, the world they grew up in, their dad being, neglectful or even cruel, their mom being really, neglectful. Like, there's those obvious things, but it's like, what are the things in our own families that we can learn about? And the first one that I thought about was internal motivation versus external motivation.
Is there a difference between internal and intrinsic, or is it the same thing?
Same thing.
Okay.
So intrinsic motivation, extrinsic or external motivation, and then also internal validation versus external validation. Okay. Because they're similar, but they're different in how we play them out. So the first thing, is talking about the Roys, because that's this family in Succession. They didn't have any internal motivation except to please their father or to be seen as their father.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't say they didn't have any. That was it. But they didn't have anything of
But
their own.
the fact that the motivation came from their father means it was extrinsic.
Correct. And that their internal sense of self, like the things
completely dependent upon
completely
what dad thinks of us.
Nobody, when they were children, honored them and were like, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? Who are you? They were pushed aside. They were put down. They were made to feel less than. And then the only time that they ever felt some sense of warmth is if their father gave them praise,
love.
Like during Shiv's, there's a scene where, and by the way, I'm going to say this. If you haven't watched Succession, there might be a few spoilers in here. We're going to try not to be so overt, but it's hard to talk about a show. I'm not going to like go through the whole finale, but I don't know exactly where we'll go.
So be forewarned.
Be forewarned. So, but there is a scene in the at a funeral where Shiv mentions to be, the time when my dad would spend time with me or talk to me or be around me, that's when I felt warmth.
Sure.
That's a very common experience, is when you have a narcissistic parent or when you have a parent that's neglectful, when they can be cruel to you all day long. But if there's a moment where they're actually engaged with you, you feel something that you aren't used to feeling the majority of your life.
Yeah.
And so everything was about getting that again, it was finding that. And so, even we're not Roys, all of us listening, but it's like, how are we talking to our kids about having their own sense of self versus having
to please us
or the external world?
Do you think it's nature or nurture that? I think it's very normal, specifically when you're younger, like we want to be noticed by our best caregivers, right? We want to be
absolutely
validated and loved and seen. So one, it's normal. Two, too
and
much
biological.
Of that, biological, because that's probably for our own safety. We got to make sure our caregivers love us, because if they don't, they'll stop loving
Survival.
us. But then if it's too much, where our happiness is completely dependent upon whether or not my mom or dad loves me, that could be a problem too.
Well, it ends up being a lot of these other things that I've written down. We can end up having enmeshment. We can end up being really codependent. We can end up, emulating their behaviors, being just like them. We can end up, having no sense of self. What did Romans say? He said, we're just a bunch of eggshells with tape or something. Like, there's nothing, he kept saying, we're all BS.
Mm-hmm.
We're all BS. We're just a bunch of eggshells and tape, or like, basically meaning there's nothing in of substance for them. And he realized that at the end. Like, they always knew it. They always knew it, which is why the only thing that made them feel of substance is having a parent, and not even a parent, their father. Mm-hmm. Notice them. That's the only thing that filled them up. And that was always dependent on the moment, on the experience. They could not depend on it in any way, shape, or form in their lives.
For some reason, I'm thinking of the movie Wall Street, where Martin and Charlie Sheen are in the elevator, and Charlie Sheen says something like that. I just wanted you to be proud of me. That's all.
Yeah.
And Martin Sheen, and I'm sure that there's quite a bit of truthfulness in that scene. And Martin Sheen's like, it's yourself that you got to be proud of yourself.
And that's a very cliche thing, especially in a movie. But to your point, it's acted really well in Wall Street. Yeah. And what he's trying to say is, it's like, we can understand, of course, we want our parents to be proud of us, but I think our parents are proud of us when we're proud of ourselves. Mm-hmm. Now, the healthy parents are not parents who are working in their own self-interest, or who are narcissistic or super enmeshed or codependent, then that can be a little iffy. But the goal is, like, we've talked about this before, but the thing that I've really appreciated in raising my daughters is the experiences as a parent where you see them find something and find joy in it, and it fills them up. If it be music, if it be, a class they've taken, if it be an extracurricular activity, a sport, whatever, and you watch it take hold of them, not because you introduced it, but because they found it. And so they have a sense of ownership and pride. And then as a parent, I don't even know if the word is pride as much as appreciation of like, oh my God, my kid has found something they love.
We did a podcast in year 2. So we're on 11 or 12. I don't know what year we're
We're on 13. Year 13.
So podcast number 68, we wrote, this is what we titled, this just said, don't tell your children you're proud of them. And then I'm sure you probably wrote this, sweetie. Instead of telling your children you are proud, why not ask them how they feel about what they did? Instead of having them impress you, why don't you ask them to reflect on their sense of accomplishment? It's a great way to get them intrinsically motivated.
That's what we're talking about here. It's interesting. That was our, you guys have to go back a decade, but that was our most controversial show, I would say. I mean, we've had other shows where people have had comments, but I just remember so much pushback on that one. And the thing is it's not, you don't have to take it so literally. Of course, you can tell your children you're proud of them occasionally. It's not like, don't use that word. That's dumb. What we're saying is, if our children are only motivated by us being proud of them, then just the nature of what we're proud of them about, is it our desires? Is it our dreams? Are we like, saying we're proud because they did something we wanted them to do?